Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Adam Goodman, partner at Ballard Partners. Adam, thank you so much for coming on.
It's great to be here as we are on the verge of the Super Bowl of a year of politics.
I know the anticipation really is killing me. This is really every political junkie's dream. We're just a few days from the Iowa caucuses, and last night on Wednesday, shocking, Christie dropped out of the race. What's your response?
Well, he certainly has no impact, a measurable impact in Iowa. He certainly does in New Hampshire, but it definitely has reset what Iowa is all about, because it's not been a race for first for many, many months. It's been a race for who may, just may, take on the president one-on-one, former president, into and beyond New Hampshire. Because of the Christie withdrawal, I think this has become even more of kind of an expectation game takeaway from Iowa, which I did an interview recently, Brittany, with one of the veteran journalists there, Kathy Abradovich, who's been involved in, I think, 5 or 6 Iowa caucuses now. And she said, Iowa is about winnowing. She said, this is a farm term where we winnow the field. We don't really necessarily select winners. And of course, history bears that out. You look at the names, Cruz and Santorum and Huckabee, who did really well in Des Moines and very badly thereafter. But they do have an impact in terms of setting the stage. And I think the stage in Iowa right now is all about who's going to take on the role of not just second place finisher in the caucuses, but maybe lead contender against the former president.
Christie was the most ardent never Trump contender in the race. So who out of either Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley heard this news and probably felt more of a sigh of relief? Because is there such thing as someone who is going to caucus for Christie and then decides, hey, I'm going to jump on the Trump train?
Well, I think the Haley troops were high-fiving each other until the secret mic conversation came out from Christie, where he said that she's going to get killed in this potential one-on-one against the former president. That certainly didn't help. But ideologically, and in terms of the positioning of the candidates, I think she is definitely a beneficiary. You saw, I think maybe just today, a new poll come out, USA Today. And by the way, disclaimer about polling the Iowa caucus, it is very difficult. Much in primaries, much less a caucus, but it is suggesting that Haley is actually taking a lead, not insignificant lead over DeSantis for second place. That would be big news coming out of Iowa. And by the way, the bigger news historically should be, and might be drowned out, should be that if Donald Trump were to score a big win there, it would be probably, looking at the recent polls showing him up 30 points or more, it would be the largest win in a contended Iowa caucus in a very, very long time in terms of margin of victory. But that may be drowned out if Nikki Haley somehow, even by half a point, edges out Ron DeSantis for second.
Adam, I have that poll, and I want to talk about it in just a moment. But before we get there, I want to talk about that Christie hot mic moment. It was less than a minute, but it really gave us some insight into the mind of Christie. He said Nikki Haley is, quote, going to get smoked. And he did mention that Ron DeSantis called him, and as Christie described him, he was, quote, petrified. So A, what do you make of those hot mic admissions? And B, Christie said, hey, I'm getting out of this race essentially so I don't help Trump win. I'm not the spoiler, but he's not endorsing any candidates. So how true is that?
I think he mitigated the power of any endorsement he may have in this race moving forward. I mean, how does he now get behind Nikki Haley and say, well, you know, it was a hot mic in the heat of the moment that did me in. I really think, you know, we've got to do something to have an alternative to Donald Trump. I think he gave away a lot of political capital in doing that. It's understandable why Ron DeSantis wouldn't greet this as good news, because I think there's an expectation that if Christie goes anywhere in the field that he would back Nikki Haley over the others.
So now let's move on to that USA poll that you mentioned. It has Trump at 53, Haley at 18, DeSantis at 15.5, and Vivek Ramaswamy at 6.5. So obviously a lot can change between now and Iowa. Obviously nothing is set in stone, but I know you said that this is about winnowing the field, but why does second place matter so much when Trump is so far ahead?
Well, there's an it's the expectations game. And Donald Trump's been way ahead of the field for a very long time in Iowa. So there was never a sense of this was going to turn into a contest, other than maybe the very beginning when Ron DeSantis came out of the gate and came out hot. There was a thinking that maybe, just maybe, even in the caucus state of Iowa, that Ron DeSantis could really take on and maybe take over the lead in this race. That has not happened. It will not happen. And there are other polls, by the way, that are showing that people say, well, can you really trust in any of this? Well, one poll in particular said that over 70% of Donald Trump's committed vote in the caucus have said they're going nowhere else but Donald Trump, and they're showing up. And more worrisome for the rest, 70%, or actually 72% of first-time caucus goers, these tend to be new to the process, could be independents and others, they also are 100% behind the former president. So there is no room there, but I guarantee you on election night, caucus night, that if Nikki Haley beats Ron DeSantis by a fraction, that'll be as much the news of the night as Donald Trump perhaps winning by over 30 points, which by any political measure is a blowout.
And is there a world that you see right now where, let's say, Donald Trump does become his party's nominee, that Nikki Haley becomes his running mate, that Ron DeSantis becomes his running mate, that any of these people go on to work in his administration? Or is their political career almost dead in the water if Donald Trump becomes the nominee?
Great question. Everyone's concerned about what is the fallout of the various scenarios. So let's say that Nikki Haley does very well in Iowa. She does very well in New Hampshire. I think if she does well in Iowa, she is going to give the former president everything he can handle in that New Hampshire primary, because, as you know, independents can come in and vote, Democrats can come in and vote. I think it could end up being a toss-up, regardless of what the former president tries to do to mitigate that. So, but in the expectations part of this, what does Nikki Haley do? If she feels she cannot go the whole way in terms of winning this presidential nomination, does she at some point make a calculated decision to try to position herself as number two on the ticket with Donald Trump, which frankly, privately, a lot of Republicans openly would love to see those two together. Would Donald Trump accept that? Don't know. What happens with Vivek Ramaswamy? Don't forget about Vivek, who I think is going to get blown out in Iowa. There's something they call the grass leak. That means in politics in Iowa, you hit every county. Well, Ron DeSantis hit every county, all 99 counties, at least once in Iowa. Vivek Ramaswamy, twice. He did a double Grassley, referring to Senator Chuck Grassley. And of course, he's not going to do well there, and he's not going to do well in New Hampshire, but he has a following in New Hampshire. Does he maybe come out of Iowa and endorse the former president? He certainly won't go with Nikki and the others. He may go with Donald Trump. So you might have Christie trying to lean towards Haley. You may have Vivek after Iowa now leaning towards the ex-president, making the New Hampshire primary truly a two-person race. Because I think it's fair to say in conjecture that if Ron DeSantis does not measure up to expectations in Iowa, it's likely, I would say, that he's going to consider withdrawing before New Hampshire, where already he is trailing badly the three people, now two people with Christie leaving that are in front of him.
I do want to talk about who has the most to win and the most to lose come Monday night, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but it does seem over the past year almost that DeSantis' star has been on the decline and Nikki Haley's star has really been on the rise in this race. I mean, if you and I were talking a year ago at this point, we would be saying Ron DeSantis does seem like the party's lead. He's the future of the party. Now it doesn't seem so much. So who has the most to gain and who has the most to lose?
Well, making one assumption that the former president is going to do well, as polls project, I think that Nikki Haley has the most to gain. If she comes in even a close third, she's done well enough. If she comes in second, again by a nose, she's going to be seen as a winner coming out of Iowa. Going into New Hampshire, where it's friendly ground, she has the governor, John Sununu, who is Chris Sununu, rather, who is behind him. He's got a lot of the political powers that are there behind him. He's got independents and others that want to send a message to the former president behind her. And so I think that this could become a two-person race. Ron DeSantis has the most to lose. To answer the other part of your question, he has to take second place. There is no good third for him. He's got to be in second place. And even then, if he is badly behind the former president and looking at New Hampshire as kind of the killing ground for him in terms of his chances of doing even decently, I think he's going to have a very difficult decision ahead, and the decision would be made between the caucuses in Iowa and the New Hampshire primary.
Let's talk about DeSantis supporters then. And obviously, this is hypothetically speaking right now because Iowa did not happen. But let's say after the caucuses, Ron DeSantis doesn't perform well. He ends up dropping out. Who then, if you're a Ron DeSantis supporter, are you going to support Nikki Haley or are you going to support Donald Trump? What type of Republican is that?
Well, they tend to be conservative. They tend to lean more towards Donald Trump, frankly, than Nikki Haley ideologically. But you know what? Here's the X factor, Brittany. Americans want a contest. We love a contest. We don't want this to be a coronation. We want to see, the playoffs. We don't want it to go directly from the regular season to the Super Bowl. We want to see the playoffs because those are interesting too. And I think there's some of that that's in play for Nikki Haley. She has the best shot to extending the race for the Republican nomination for president more than anybody else in the field right now. And of course, right after New Hampshire, with the little sidestep of Nevada, which has kind of a strange system in play, two different caucuses and a primary, and they go to South Carolina, the home state of Nikki Haley. That, if it were a one-on-one contest, becomes fascinating because that's an all or nothing kind of race for Nikki Haley. She can't go into her home state and not prevail over the former president, but the polls there suggest that in and of itself is a tall mountain to climb.
I do want to talk about a potential wrinkle come Monday, and the Des Moines Register is reporting that Caucus Day on Monday could be the coldest on record. Do you think this is going to impact turnout at all?
I love looking at the Weather Channel when it comes into the Iowa Caucus night. I mean, you would think that the cold, it could be raining and sleeting and snowing, would keep people away. Traditionally not. Believe it or not, they are a cold weather ilk in Iowa. This doesn't seem to dissuade a lot of caucus goers, even though, as you know, Brittany, going to a caucus takes a real commitment of time and effort if the roads are impassable. So yeah, sure, it could have a difference. And it's funny because in an interview I did with Kathy Abramovich of the Capital Dispatch, I said, "So how's the weather?" Right? Because that's what everyone wants to know. But I think in this race, with the numbers as they are, it certainly could have some impact on you might say, the race within a race. Haley versus DeSantis, it will have no impact on Donald Trump being declared the winner of that caucus.
And Adam, in an earlier conversation, you said that the caucuses does have a big consequence. Can you describe really what that consequence is when we're looking forward to New Hampshire next?
Well, for the first time, the whole country is going to be focused on one place with the first balloting of the campaign. This is the first time, beyond all the conjecture and speculation and polls that have been floated, these are real numbers. And I think that Iowa likes being in that spotlight, even though they say we have not been great predictors of winners. From what I gather from talking to people, they're okay with that. Again, the winnowing process, they're okay basically culling the field for the rest of America to entertain. So the contest becomes more compact, more understandable, and maybe more definitive when it's all said and done. But if you were to ask Huckabee and Cruz and Rick Santorum, if you ask them, they would say, well, geez, we really thought we had momentum. George Bush, you go back to when George Bush beat Ronald Reagan in Iowa, Big Mo. Well, the Big Mo turned into Low Mo in New Hampshire and No Mo after New Hampshire when Ronald Reagan took on George Bush and handily beat him, and then was well on his way to the nomination.
You bring up a really, really interesting point, and that is that Iowa really isn't a great predictor. Since 1972, there are only 3 contenders when they were running, aside from those running uncontested, 3 candidates who won their Iowa caucus who went on to win the presidency. Those are Jimmy Carter, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama. So how does the wind get knocked out of so many people's sails from Iowa to New Hampshire to Super Tuesday? And I'm looking at you, Pete Buttigieg, Ted Cruz, Rick Santorum, right. Mike Huckabee. Right. How does that happen?
Well, first of all, Iowa, to be frank, is not a tremendous demographic reflection of the country at large. They're just not. And it's one of the reasons why Democrats move successfully to go from Iowa to South Carolina as their first kind of ballot measure in the primary contest for president. And there's nothing you can do about that. I mean, Iowa is Iowa. But the nice thing about Iowa politics is it's very personal. In New Hampshire, I think you would say the same thing. People get a good feeling about the contenders, up close and direct. And that actually has become now at the become the scourge of modern day media there, who are frustrated that candidates are no longer sitting down for editorial board interviews. They don't want to go one-on-one with the Des Moines Register. They want to go one-on crowd with the people of Iowa. And you're seeing that also in New Hampshire. That, by the way, is one of the interesting trends, Brittany, in politics. I mean, I think we've gone from barnstorming to something that is more social broadcast and cable media driven in terms of winners and losers. I rue that, frankly, because I think the personal nature of politics is very important. I think it's critical that we see our future leaders asked questions and to gauge the manner of their reactions to the questions as opposed to the policies they are prescribing. That I think we're missing a lot of. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's just a sign of the times. That certainly plays into Donald Trump's hands. As you know, Donald Trump has attended 0 debates. He's going to attend in this primary season 0 debates. Instead, he's gone the town hall route. Fox News and others have done him a great favor. Tucker Carlson and others in trying to give him an alternate stage. The alternate stage has been well received, has been widely viewed. And if you know anything about Donald Trump, he understands the most important numbers are how many people are watching. He got that from his days in television. He's carried that through into his days in public elected life. And I think he's right. I think the more people that are watching, the more audience you have, the more likely it is you're going to have that wind in your sails to move forward.
Well, thank you, Adam, per usual. I love our conversations. Me, the biggest political junkie, is always grateful for them. And as the campaign trail continues, as 2024 officially kicks off next week, I hope you join me again.
Well, I'd love to do that. And again, we're moving into a year that is unprecedented. There is no book on this one. I mean, everyone can see the things that are happening or not happening have never happened or not happened before. Heaven knows where we are at the end of the line, except this will be one for the books.
I've heard that word a lot, unprecedented, and I do just want to note my very first day in news, I was working and Christie dropped out of the 2016 campaign. And now, 8 years later, here I am, he dropped out again. Are we ever going to be back in precedented times? Because I've heard unprecedented my whole life.
Well, I think, first of all, there now is a new thing called the Brittany poll. That's you predicting Christie's political fortunes. No, we're never going back. It's funny when you say, oh, everything's changed. Why is everything changed? Because everything in the world has changed. The way we communicate has changed. Our expectations have changed. The state of the world has changed. And so, predictably, the state of politics does as well. And I think what we're looking at is going to be captivating. It's going to be both exhilarating and depressing at times, but it'll be captivating all the way through. And it's not just Americans who are looking on, it's the rest of the free world.
And it certainly is never a boring day. Adam Goodman, thanks for joining me.
And my pleasure.